The first thing that the CEO should do would be to walk around the organization and start asking people why they chose to work for the organization. Every single person that made a decision to be a part of my company, why did you make a decision to be a part of this company? Outside of just you needed a job, you needed a paycheck, you could have gotten a job or a paycheck working anywhere. Why here? Why did you choose to work here? And I would ask everyone in my organization that question, because inevitably it will remind you of the purpose of your organization. And more importantly, it'll remind you of your why behind why you started it, to reactivate the purpose. Your purpose is innate in how you were created. It's in your DNA. It's part of who you are. Each of us have been given a specific set of gifts, talents, abilities, skill sets, personalities that make up who we are. So those things can't be taken away. You can develop them and get better at them, but they can't be removed. You can refine them, you can improve them, but they can't be lost. They're already in you. However, your why, your motivation, your mindset to actually do those things can very much be lost.
All right, welcome to another episode of The Freedom Experience. I'm your host, John Moncrief. My guest today is Davin Salvagno. I'm really excited to have him on the show. He's a best-selling author, keynote speaker, and one of the most powerful voices on purpose and leadership today. Davin founded the Purpose Summit, and they've just come off a super successful event in Charlotte, North Carolina. He's also just released Thieves of Purpose, which is a book that explores the 12 mindsets that are quietly stealing your full potential. So I first heard Davin speak at Small Giant Summit in Detroit, and I remember being really moved by his story, the honesty, the clarity, and the way that he reframed what purpose means. And I knew right then that I had to get him on the show. So in this conversation, we unpack why purpose isn't something that you find, that it's something that we remember. Like, we all have a purpose. In fact, we have many of them. I have a purpose as a father, as a business owner, as a partner, as a podcast host. But sometimes it feels like that purpose kind of evaporates or isn't there. And what's actually missing is our sense of why, the motivation to step into what we already know matters. So Davin and I talk about how we lose that why and how we get it back, and how we align and the relation between why and purpose. And they're not the same thing, but how they connect. So we explore a couple of the thieves. We talk about, Davin explains why comparison is the first thief to watch out for, how it derails both our work and identity, and why your business probably doesn't have a purpose problem, but more of a distraction problem. So we jump into a couple of those thieves. And if you've ever been feeling stuck, off course, unsure about what's driving you at work or personally, then I think this is the episode for you. So we talk a lot about why and purpose. Grab a notebook and hop in and have a listen. This was a fantastic episode, and I really enjoyed Davin's energy and having him on the show. Davin, welcome to the show. I've been, as I said before we hit the record button, super excited to talk to you, and I think this is really important now. So welcome onto the show.
So grateful to be here on the show with you. I enjoyed meeting together at Small Giants last year, and appreciate your kind comments on the work of purpose since then, and delighted for our conversation today.
Yeah, and you've just come off a fantastic show yourself. How many folks have you had this year? 350 odd, or did I get that?
There was just under 400 people.
Just under 400.
Yeah, at the Purpose Summit. Each year is different. We've had as many as 600. It's usually between 4 and 6 is what we average each year. This was the 6th anniversary of the Purpose Summit.
Congratulations, and I hope it goes from strength to strength. And just for the audience, how did you land up kind of getting to where you are, where you're running the Purpose Summit? You've just written a book on the Thieves of Purpose, but you kind of got known as the purpose guy. And what's your story? How did you get here?
Well, that's very kind. Purpose certainly isn't my thing. It has been something that has kind of become my life's work. But purpose has been around for a long time. There's a lot of people who've been in the space for a lot longer than I have. It's a long story of how I got there. But to summarize, I went to school to be a teacher. That's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a teacher. I was fascinating with learning, and one of the things that I liked to do is not learn to acquire knowledge, but learn to share knowledge. And so, I became an avid reader and just genuinely took interest in other people and their thoughts, their behaviors, all those things. And while going to school to become a teacher, I had worked at Costco and Macy's and CVS Health, a variety of different companies. And along that leadership journey, working with those companies, there was a common behavior that others called out in me that I didn't actually see. They saw it. And it was this unique ability to really be present with people, understand, who they are, why they do what they do, what their gifts, talents, abilities, and skill sets are, how they use those on a daily basis in their work, which ones they're not using in their work, and which ones could they pull into their work. And so as I became an avid student of leadership, one of the things that I found myself doing was incorporating purpose into leadership. And Nick Craig wrote a great book called Leading from Purpose. He's been doing this much longer than I have. But in many ways, that was the essence of how this entire thing started. Was I started leading people on a daily basis, not based off of what they needed to do, but based off of who they needed to be. Started to help them see how they need to show up in each moment to be able to step into the fullness of themselves so that they could perform at high levels and experience fulfillment in their work. I didn't know that that's what I was doing at the time. Looking back now, I can see that that's what I was doing between 2001 and 2016 for that 15-year time frame. And in 2016 is when I left the corporate world and decided to start a coaching consulting firm called Purpose Point, which was focused on initially helping companies actually focus on their purpose for why they started the business beyond profit, and then to help them do the same thing that I was doing, which was help understand the purpose of the people in their workforce and connect individual purpose to organizational purpose.
Nice. How do you, I'm really curious about connecting individual purpose to organizational purpose. And I feel like in both instances, we have trouble kind of uncovering that purpose sometimes, and maybe where a lot of the alignment issues and challenges are in the workplace. And how do you, I know it's a big question, but I guess where do you even start with trying to get these?
It is a big question, but the answer is actually quite simple. And the reason it's a big question is because most people have the wrong perspective on purpose. They think purpose is this singular, grandiose idea for their life, which then makes it extremely limited. And if I have to pick one singular, grandiose idea for my entire reason of being and what my entire life is supposed to mean, that with all the options that are in the world, that's a paralyzing conversation. So most people avoid that. But when we reframe purpose and recognize that purpose on a more practical level is plural and momentary, that you have multiple purposes that actually sometimes are even competing for each other in any given moment of time, and you know what those are, well, now it's a different question. Now it's an understanding of who do I need to be in this moment, not necessarily pigeonhole myself into what's the one thing I'm going to do. And part of the reason that I think that we're challenged with that is, growing up in school, everyone would always ask, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up? What do you want to be?
Yeah, I remember that.
What do you want to be when you grow up? And our answer to that question was never an accurate answer. It wasn't, I want to be a encourager, an inspirer, a great listener. We didn't sound off all of the different behaviors that we wanted to exhibit that define who we would be. What we did was we named a role or a position. We said, I want to be a firefighter or a teacher or a lawyer or a doctor. And so we equated this question of who do you want to be to really with what do you want to do. And so now there's this misperception of purpose is really what you do, and it's not. Purpose is who you are. So we need to step back and we need to separate purpose from the actual job title or role itself. And instead we need to ask ourselves and take inventory of what is it that we are uniquely good at? What are our gifts, talents, abilities, and skill sets? And that's question one. Question two then is, what are the needs that are around me? So in my home, there are needs. In my community, there are needs. And in my workplace, there are needs. On my team, if I'm on a team, there are needs. So depending on what the needs are, which gifts, talents, abilities, and skill sets do I embody that I need to activate in the moment to meet the needs of those that are around me? And that is how you step into purpose. Once you reframe purpose that way, it all of a sudden becomes a lot more manageable to understand how you're supposed to show up at home, how you're supposed to show up at work, how you're supposed to show up in whatever room that you're in, because you're acutely aware of who you are, the value that you add, and the needs that are around you and how you meet those needs by stepping into who you need to be into the moment. So that's the individual piece.
Yeah.
The organizational piece is not much different. Often we look at organizational purpose, and so many times it gets convoluted as some, conscious capitalism or, corporate social responsibility initiative or something like that. When realistically, if you look at the purpose of every organization, there's a story behind every organization. At some point in time, they saw a problem in the world that they wanted to solve, or there was a gap in the world that they wanted to step into, and they developed a product, a service. They developed something that met a need. So they used what they were great at to meet a need. It's the same exact conversation. And they invite people then to join them in this purpose. They start putting processes into place. They start measuring performance. They start turning a profit. And all too often, they start focusing more on the process, performance, and profit. They forget the founding purpose, and they forget they invited people to be a part of it. So the way that you connect individual and organizational purpose is really asking the same set of questions. On an individual level, what is it that you're great at? What are the needs that we have around you that you can step into? As an organization, what is it that we're great at? What are the needs in humanity or whatever that we're stepping into? And how can you use whatever gifts, talents, and abilities you have to help us step into those needs?
I love it. It actually really simplifies it. And I think I'm probably going to go into one of your thieves here, but going back to the story about we go to school, we look around us and we're pushed to like, what do we be when we grow up? And we see some of the folks around us who know that they want to be a doctor, and they've probably got a higher purpose, which is helping people to get well or better, or looking after or caring for people. And they sort of go down that path, that journey in their lives. And I guess we compare ourselves to them and think, what's going on here? Why can't I find my purpose? And if I remember rightly, I think that's one of the thieves that you talk about in the book, is this idea of comparison. And we keep comparing ourselves to other people. And I suppose in the organizations, we do the same thing, where we're looking at our peers and the organizations around us and keep comparing ourselves. And that's a thief stealing away our purpose.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Comparison is actually chapter 1 of Thieves of Purpose. And the reason I made it chapter 1 is because it's probably the most prevalent thief. It's something that we all do. Every single one of us is constantly comparing ourselves to someone or something else. The challenge is that we're not comparing ourselves with equal measure. We're not comparing ourselves in the way that is healthy. We're comparing ourselves in a way that is unhealthy and unrealistic, to be truthful. What I mean by that is often, especially in the world of social media, we compare our accomplishments to the accomplishments of others without knowing their story or journey, and placing ourselves either in the same set of circumstances or on the same timeline. In fact, great example. One of our favorite comedians that my wife Amy and I like to watch is Nate Bargatze. And he seemingly has become a phenom overnight. He's selling out arenas everywhere. But I just saw a post yesterday that showed Nate Bargatze in 2013 and Nate Bargatze in 2025. And in 2013, Nate Bargatze was a struggling father and husband that was playing at any club that would give him a microphone. No one knew who he was. And it took him 12 years to be selling out arenas. But what happens is we look at, someone's success, and we don't take into account the 12-year journey that it took him to get there and what they needed to overcome in order for that to happen. And that story is all too common. You can read story after story of people who've achieved some level of success, and then you take a look at the journey that it took to get there, and then all of a sudden it humbles us a little bit and it makes it more relatable. You shared earlier when we were starting, before we hit record, that you appreciated how I shared my vulnerable story at Small Giants Community Summit last year. And I debated on whether I should share it. And then everyone thanked me for sharing it because it suddenly made me more relatable. So when we look at comparison, there's two ways that you can end up comparing yourself. You can either compare yourself up and start looking at what others have accomplished, what they have that you don't, the life that they're living versus the life that you should be living. And what happens is you experience envy. And envy is actually what robs us of our joy, not comparison itself. One of my favorite quotes used to be, comparison is the thief of joy, but that's not true. Envy is the thief of joy. Because if you compare yourself the other way, if you start comparing yourself to where you've been and you look at the journey that you've been on and how far you've come, all of a sudden you experience gratitude. If you look at what maybe you actually have, the blessings that you have in your life that other people don't, you experience gratitude, and gratitude that can then lead to joy. And that level of comparison is healthy, because often what will happen is when we start pinning envy and gratitude up against each other, first of all, gratitude wins every time over envy, but it also resets our values and it tells us what's important to us. And when we get to that place, we actually can experience an invitation to step into purpose. What happens is when we start looking at those things, we start taking inventory of the things that we deeply care about, the problems that we see in the world, the things people are struggling with. We start asking, how can we help? So when you experience a healthy level of comparison, it can actually be an invitation for you to step into your purpose by taking an inventory of the needs that are around you.
Yeah, I think being able to look back at where you've come from and connect those dots as you kind of look back is so important. But I imagine that without having a sense of purpose to pull you along, you can kind of just land up in a bit of a rut with, again, whether you're a business or an individual, you just sort of get stuck there. And I think that's probably why your book is so important at the moment, that we know what those thieves are and we're conscious of what those thieves are in stealing purpose away from us.
That's true, right? And the thing is purpose doesn't necessarily pull you. Purpose grounds you, but it's not directional. Let me explain what I mean by that. There's been a lot of convolution between the words purpose and why, right? Simon Sinek wrote Start With Why, and there's a lot of people that equate those two words. They are two very different words. Purpose is your reason for being. Your why is your reason for doing. It's your motivation that actually activates your purpose. I can be very clear about what my purpose is. I've got multiple purposes. I've got a purpose as a husband, as a father, as a speaker, as an author, as a musician. I've got multiple gifts, talents, and abilities and skill sets that I can activate at any moment and use at any moment to meet the needs of those around me. But I'm a human being just like everybody else. There are some days that, quite frankly, maybe I just don't feel like it. Maybe I'm not motivated. Maybe I'm stuck in my head with a whole bunch of different challenges and struggles, and the thieves are attacking me. I shared when I wrote the book that, hey, I have identified these 12 thieves, but I still struggle with all 12 of them the same way that you do. My goal in writing the book was to help you identify when they show up and how to confront them based off of my research and experiences. So once we recognize that there's these things that are attacking us, we could be clear about what our purpose is, but then all of a sudden life happens and we lose the motivation to actually step into it. So that's when we need to actually reactivate our why. And our why is actually grounded in our who. And what I mean by that is, if I were to start asking you, why do you do what you do? Why is the work that you do so important? Why did you choose to step into your purpose when maybe it was hardest? You will ultimately eventually tell me a story of someone. You will tell me a story of maybe it was a relative, living or past, maybe a friend, maybe something you experienced in your own childhood, something someone said to you, but you will tell me a story. And in that story will be the voice of a person that is your motivation, that's your who, that activates your why to step into your purpose. And so that's so important. Let me give you a great example. I didn't want to rewrite The Thieves of Purpose. I had written it once. I had lost the manuscript. There's a long story behind that. It took 2 years to had written what I had wrote. And then when I had lost it, I felt like I had built this beautiful sandcastle, and then an ocean wave came and just wiped it out. And I was tired and I didn't want to rewrite it. And my friend Scott Miller, who also happens to be my literary agent, we were having a conversation one day, and I said, Scott, I really don't want to rewrite the book. It was too much work. It's not worth it. And Scott got very quiet. and he's got these iconic glasses, kind of like yours. And he took his glasses off for a moment, and he looked at me through the Zoom screen, and he said, Davin, I didn't want to become a father. I was a highly successful 7-figure paid executive driving around a sports car. I met a hot, tall blonde. We fell in love, got married. I now have 3 boys, and I don't know how to be a father. And I don't know what's robbing me of my purpose as a father. I need you to write this book so that I can step into my purpose as a father. And in that moment, I refound my inspiration to write the book. In that moment, my why was reactive. My purpose had never changed. My purpose had always existed to use my gifts as a writer to write the book. That was fixed. But I lost my motivation. But then when Scott said those words, he suddenly became the who behind my why.
Gotcha.
Actually write my book.
That's so powerful. I mean, when you reflect on the past 12 years or 15 years that you've been doing this, what's something that's really fundamental that's changed in terms of your thinking? Or has it all just stayed the same?
No, it has progressed over time. I wouldn't say that there's anything foundationally that's changed. I would say it's kind of like a skyscraper, right? It started with this firm foundation. And then, when I started this work, it was a 3-story building. And then maybe it was a 5-story building, and then a 10-story building. And so, it's just been kind of adding on layers since, with each, book that I have read along this journey, with each talk that I've given, with each conversation that I've had, there's been this long journey of self-discovery that continues to add new insight to the conversation. There are some fundamental truths that haven't changed from the very beginning, such as purpose being your reason for being and why being your reason for doing, purpose being plural and momentarily and not singular and grandiose. Those have always been fundamental to the identity of purpose, and even the elements of purpose, which again, I didn't come up with. There's a concept called ikigai, which has been around for a long time, that talks about purpose being a combination of what you're great at, what the world needs, what you love to do, and what you get paid to do. What I did with that diagram was I just prioritized those 4 elements. Most people look at purpose and they say, how do I get paid to do what I love to do? Everyone wants to get paid to do what they love to do. That's stepping into your purpose.
Find your purpose, do what you love to do, and all will be good.
That's right. That's not the starting point of purpose. That's a qualifier of purpose, but it's not the starting point. The starting point is the other 2 circles. It's taking an inventory of what you're great at, and then asking, where are there needs around me where I can use what I'm great at to meet the needs of others. And once you do that, then you ask, okay, when I do that, which of those things fulfill me and which of those things drain me? Because there's things that I'm great at that I can do that meet the needs of others, but quite frankly, they drain me. They're exhausting. And if I spent my entire life doing that, that probably would not be healthy. There are other things that I'm great at that people need, that when I do those things, they fulfill me, they re-energize me. Those are things that I love to do. And that is a validation that you are in your purpose. I shared in the book that joy is often evidence in our lives that we are operating in our purpose. So when you use what you're great at to meet the needs of others, which of those things bring you joy? And then once you've identified that, how do you do that more often? And then how can you incorporate that into your job or your career, into your finances? What you get paid to do is the last and final and least important element of the purpose diagram.
Yeah. Okay. Good. I'm thinking about the idea of losing your sense of purpose. It sounds like you don't actually lose the sense of purpose. You maybe lose your why.
That's right.
And, I think back to Small Giants again, I think the same year that you spoke, Paul Spiegelman spoke about the dealing with depression and going through depression and trying to kind of refine that purpose. Is that what's actually happening? We're losing our why. The purpose is still there, still a purpose as a father, as a business owner, whatever, but we're losing the why, the reason, going back to your book again. So
that's exactly right. I would offer that you can't lose your purpose. Your purpose is innate in how you were created. It's in your DNA. It's part of who you are. Each of us have been given a specific set of gifts, talents, abilities, skill sets, personalities that make up who we are. So those things can't be taken away. You can develop them and get better at them, but they can't be removed. So you can refine them, you can improve them, but they can't be lost. They're already in you. However, your why, your motivation, your mindset to actually do those things can very much be lost. And that's actually what happens. And so, I know the book is called Thieves of Purpose. The reality is, if someone were to rob you of something, it's not called destroyers of purpose. It's called thieves of purpose. If I were to take something from you, the thing that I take still exists. I haven't destroyed it. The question is, how do you get it back?
Yeah.
And so, in essence, the book really identifies the things that are pulling our attention that are away from our purpose. So when you look at comparison, when you look at competition, when you look at distraction, when you look at excuses, procrastination, lies, fear, doubt, indifference, unbelief, even success, all the thieves that I mentioned in that book, those things are really derailers that take our attention off of who we are, who we're meant to be, how we're meant to show up, because we're placing our attention on something else. And that's what's actually robbing us of actually stepping into our purpose. It's not actually taking our purpose away.
So when your book goes missing or disappears or whatever happens there, you've lost the will to go and sort of write it again for a period of time. And it took you finding that why again to, okay, there's a reason I'm doing this.
Exactly. For many of us, there's two things that drive us to action. One is pain, and the other is impact. If one of the things I share in the book is that until the pain of remaining the same is greater than the pain of change, you won't take action. So a lot of times we talk about what we want to do, who we want to become, what we have in life, but we also become complacent in our circumstances. And until the pain of those circumstances, the pain of our situation is greater than the pain of actually changing, we don't step into it. So one thing that moves us to action, that motivates our why, is pain. Like, I cannot do this anymore. I have to do something. That motivates us. The other, which is more positive, is impact. And that impact is often because we see a pain outside of ourselves, not in ourselves, that we want to do something about. We see a pain in the world, or we see a pain in our past, right? A lot of people, if you ask them why they became doctors, or specifically maybe why they went into oncology, they will probably tell you the history of someone in their life that struggled or passed away from cancer, right? Again, there's a who behind the why. And so what happens is they see a pain in the world they want to do something about, in this case, cure cancer. And so then they become a doctor and oncologist because they want to make an impact. So either it's pain in ourselves that moves us to action, or it's pain outside of ourselves that we want to do something about. So we want to make an impact. And those are the two things that motivate our why. And then our purpose is just how we step into that.
Something that I've been curious about as well is whether, and I've been listening to your podcast, whether faith-based businesses are better at this than so the average run-of-the-mill businesses. The reason I ask that is I've worked with a few faith-based businesses, and they just seem to have this dialed in a lot better than most of the other businesses I've worked with. And having listened to your podcast, wondering if that's something you see as well.
I don't know if they're better at it, but I will say that they're more grounded. And what I mean by that, so since we talked about faith-based, there's a great parable about seeds and the soil and the things that they fall on. And the parable talks about how, when seeds fall from a tree, it fell on concrete and it got scorched by the sun. And then another seed fell, and it fell, in the thicket of weeds, and the weeds choked it out. And then another seed fell, and it fell, in the soil, and the soil was fertile and it grew. And so what I would say is that faith-based businesses tend to be that fertile soil. So it's not that they do it better, but I do think that the soil is more fertile for the conversation. And the reason why is because most faith-based business owners or leaders recognize their business isn't just a business, it's also a calling, it's a ministry. Impact is ingrained in the identity of why it exists. And so, purpose is a fundamental element of the business's existence. It doesn't mean that they're not focused on profit or making money. It's just that they are equally, if not more, focused on its purpose and impact. And so, therefore, it's more fertile conversation it's more fertile soil for the conversation. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're better at it. I know a lot of faith-driven businesses that while the soil is fertile and they should be knocking this out of the park, they get it completely wrong because they fall susceptible to the same things that we all do, the same thieves of purpose. They start pursuing the wrong things. Mission drift is a very, very big thing. I have seen a lot of organizations move away from their founding purpose and their founding mission in the pursuit of profit and growth and scalability, and they justify it through purpose and impact, but that's really just to make them feel better about it. There was actually one of our friends who was at the Small Giant Summit, Eric Rieger. He just wrote an article yesterday on LinkedIn, fantastic article.
Love his articles. He's always got something great. Yeah.
And the article he wrote yesterday, he had interviewed, and forgive me, I can't remember if it was an optometrist or a doctor. It was someone in the medical community. And the nature of the conversation was, why aren't you scaling? Why aren't you opening up more locations? And the doctor's response was they weren't measuring the amount of locations. They were measuring how well they impacted the lives of their patients. And so his concern was that if they were focused on scaling, opening more locations, doing more volume, it might cannibalize their true purpose, which was the quality of care of their patients. And so, I would say that when it comes to the faith-based community, I think they are more dialed into prioritizing people over profit. It's not always the case. I think outside of the faith-based community, there just tends to be more of an emphasis on profit over people. One other thing I'll say about that is, I shared at the Purpose Summit, and I think I shared it at Small Giants last year. There's really two types of business leaders. There are business leaders that use people to build their business, and then there are business leaders that use businesses to build people. And I would just offer that in the faith-based community, I think it's more natural for business leaders to use their business to build people. And outside of the faith-based community, it's more natural for business leaders to use people to build their business.
And if you're focusing or you're looking at it that way, and you're focused on your people and you're focused on that core purpose, those outputs are probably going to come anyway. So the profit will probably come, the new offices or the extra reach will probably come because you're focused on patients or people or whoever it is that and that core purpose. And ultimately, the outputs will come.
That's exactly right. And here's the thing is, you don't have to be a faith-based company to get that right. Great example is WD-40. Gary Ridge, who is the CEO of WD-40 for 25 years and has spoken at the Purpose Summit for each of the last 4 years, he's probably one of the best examples of a non-faith-based company, publicly traded company, a brand that most people have in their house all over the world that got this right. If you were to ask him what WD-40's purpose is, he would say to create positive, lasting memories in the lives of all of their employees, their families, their workplaces, and the people that use their products. And you would say, wait, create positive, lasting memories? What are you talking about? Well, the reality is anyone who's used WD-40, you have a memory attached to that. In fact, Gary would probably ask you and say, tell me about the last time that you used WD-40. And I might say something like, well, to spray my son's bike because the gears were all grimy.
Yeah.
And he would say, so you sprayed WD-40 on the gears of the bike, and what happened? Well, the bike went faster, and Bennett went and had a great time, and he was smiling and laughing. And he's like, so you could smell the WD-40 and you can see your son riding his bike, smiling and laughing. We helped create that memory. And so what he's done is he's attached the impact of the product to the purpose of the organization. And so everyone who's at WD-40 understands what they're contributing to. As a result of that, because they're not just focused on making oil in a can, how many cans they produce, how many deals they have, how many factories they have across the world, everyone is fully aligned on, by working at WD Company 40, I am helping create memories in the lives of all those that use this product. Something so simple, but so powerful. Their business results, if you look year after year, double-digit growth in even some of the worst economic times, and an employee retention rate of 96% in manufacturing, which is unheard of, to have that level of engagement and retention in manufacturing. So when you do focus on purpose, and you do focus on people, and you do focus on impact, and you do a little bit of storytelling to connect the thread, and people understand how their individual purpose connects with the organization's purpose, they show up every day with the sense of impact, they perform at a higher level, they're more engaged, you experience less turnover. As a result of all of those different things, production goes up, productivity goes up, commitment goes up, culture improves, profit improves. It becomes this massive upward spiral. But it requires you to play the long game to experience the fruit of that labor. And all too often, so many companies are focused on just making their next quarterly earnings. And so they're short-sighted. They make decisions out of fear rather than out of purpose. One thing that Gary will tell you is that in his 25 years as CEO of WD-40, they never laid off a single employee. Not one. In 25 years, through some of the worst economic downturns.
And they've seen economic downturns.
2008, 2001, never laid off an employee. Now, that doesn't mean that they didn't manage out poor performers. They did. But they never laid off someone that they wanted to keep because of a downturn in quarterly earnings or profit, because Gary knew that if they did that, it would send shockwaves through the organization of fear and insecurity and a disconnection to the purpose for which people came. It would become a massive distraction. And he knew that, we might have we might take a loss this quarter, we might take a loss next quarter, but we're going to rebound a lot faster than everybody else because we are not creating uncertainty. And it paid off in dividends, quite literally, year after year after year.
I mean, when you talked about that, first thing, when you mentioned WD-40, first thing that came to mind was my grandfather, and sort of being a young kid and him using WD-40 and it always being around. And straight away, those memories come back. And you're right. It's like you mentioned it, I could feel the sort of hair stand up on my arms and the memories flood back. I mean, just to what you're talking about now, with we're going through difficult times, uncertain times at the moment. And I bet a lot of businesses are looking at this and, do we focus on profit? Is this purpose stuff something that we should be focusing on? I'm curious about what your response to that is at the moment.
I would offer that it's the most important time that you need to. In fact, one of the great stories that was shared at the Purpose Summit this year was from Broad River Retail. And Broad River Retail is a furniture company that owns 32 Ashley home stores in the United States. And I think they're actually buying some more territory and knocking on the door of 40 different locations up and down the East Coast. Their two partners, who are the CEO and COO of the company, they were on a panel discussion with myself and Nick Craig, who wrote Leading from Purpose. And Nick has done this work with Unilever and Ben & Jerry's and Heineken and big companies all over the world. And we had this very, very discussion about, what do you do in uncertain times when you're trying to you're in survival mode? Every penny counts, every dollar counts. Do you really have time to spend on this purpose and people stuff? And Charlie and Manny from Broad River Retail shared that that's actually when it's most important. And they told a story about how in 2015, all of their assets were in special assets with the bank, which basically means that they were on the verge of bankruptcy. Every penny counted. The bank was holding all of their assets hostage. Any day they could wake up and say, we're seizing your assets, you're out, sorry, we're taking everything.
Game over.
And they had a decision to make. They said, well, we can either double down on our purpose, or we can start laying a whole bunch of people off, start going into damage control, and just hope that there's something left to salvage at the end. They doubled down on purpose. During this moment in time, when the bank was quite literally holding a gun to their head, they decided to have strategic planning meetings. They reclarified their purpose as an organization, their mission, their vision, their values. They took people out of the business to actually have these conversations and invested time into the discussion. They then actually went a step further and approved merit increases across the organization rather than freezing pay.
All while under the barrel of a gun.
What's that?
All while
looking down the barrel of a gun, right?
Yeah.
They approved merit increases across the board to motivate people, because people were afraid. They were scared. They were fearful of, am I going to have a job? Am I not going to have a job? What's going to happen? So they recreated a sense of purpose, a sense of belief, and a sense of certainty in the organization. And almost overnight, what happened is, because this was so uncommon that they did this, their entire organization, all of their employees rallied around the company. They showed up and gave more of themselves than they ever gave before. Their performance levels were, and their attitudes were at an all-time high. They started to sell more furniture than they ever did before. Culture improved overnight, and they emerged within a year and a half out of special assets. And not only did they save the company, they grew double digits year after year for the next 9 years. And they went from, being a $50 million company that was on the verge of bankruptcy to this year, they're knocking on the door of 500 million. So 10x growth in 10 years, when it should have all fallen apart. And the reason why is because they said, well, we can go into survival mode and start doing what everybody else does.
Yeah.
Start cutting things. People will start leaving. No one's going to be productive. People are just going to do the bare minimum until they can find something else, and we're going to lose the company. Or we can double down, invest in our purpose, invest in our people, get our team to rally around this thing and save this thing. And they did. So I would argue that it's in your most challenging, tough times, when your back is up against the wall, when the scoreboard says that you're going to lose, that you as a leader need to step in and have that locker room moment where you say, we might lose this game.
Yeah.
But we are going to go out swinging. We are going to step in and double down on our purpose, our mission, our vision, our values. We're not going to compromise those things. And in fact, we're going to do the exact opposite of what other people are going to do. We're going to invest in our people to improve their morale because we believe in them, and they're going to respond. And
I love it. Yeah. So off the back of that, purpose or profit, what's harder to pursue?
Ooh, what's harder to pursue?
Yeah. Like if I'm a business owner right now, and I'm like,
so I would say purpose is easier to pursue, but harder to sustain. And profit is harder to pursue, but, and maybe for the wrong reasons, easier to sustain. Let me explain what I mean by that. Purpose is very simple. We just spent almost an hour talking about what it is. So it doesn't take a lot of effort to pursue it. It just takes time, commitment to do it. It takes calling a timeout and saying, hey, we're going to focus on purpose. There's not a degree of difficulty there. There's just a degree of commitment, right? Profit is harder to pursue. It's not easy to just start a business and become profitable. That's the reason that 97% of businesses go out of business in the first 3 years. However, once you achieve profit and you put systems in place and you focus on the right things, it's easier to sustain it if you've done the right things. So purpose, easier to pursue, harder to sustain because we experience mission drift. We start focusing on all the wrong things. Profit, harder to pursue, easier to sustain once you put the right systems and things in place and you stay focused on the right things.
Nice. And one thing that you'd say to a CEO, and I'm thinking back to what we were talking about with a company that's lost its purpose, but what we're actually talking about a company that's lost its why. What's the first thing that CEO should do?
The first thing that the CEO should do would be to walk around the organization and start asking people why they chose to work for the organization.
Yeah. Why they all
First
kind
thing
of
they should do.
love it. Yeah.
If my
What?
company were falling apart, I would start walking around and asking each and every single person that made a decision to be a part of my company, why did you make a decision to be a part of this company?
Yeah.
Outside of just you needed a job, you needed a paycheck, you could have gotten a job or a paycheck working anywhere. Why here? Why did you choose to work here? And I would ask everyone in my organization that question, because inevitably it will remind you of the purpose of your organization. And more importantly, it'll remind you of your why behind why you started it, to reactivate the purpose.
Yeah. When we go right back to the beginning, why is it that I started this business?
That's right.
And we don't spend enough time telling our people or kind of reinforcing that reason as we grow, as we bring more people on and we get caught up in the weeds. And I think it's brilliant, like go back and ask our people why. I get one last question. The podcast is a freedom experience. What does freedom mean to you, Davin?
Freedom has a lot of different definitions and connotations. For me personally, freedom is not being held captive by anything or anyone. And a lot of times we can be held captive by ourselves. We can be held captive by our circumstances. We could be held captive by false mindsets like the thieves of purpose. And so once we've understood that circumstances don't define us, that choices do, that we can choose to not be held captive by anything or anyone, that gives us a whole level of freedom that most people rarely experience. I think often of a story, of this kid who, he was standing up and the mom said, sit down. And he goes, no, I will not sit down. And the kid's standing up and the mom says, sit down. And the kid says, no, I will not sit down. And the mom says, sit down. And he says, I will not sit down. And the mom takes him by the shoulders and sits him on the couch. And she says, you're sitting now. And he says, I am, but on the inside, I'm still standing up. And so to me, that's freedom, right?
Yeah.
Freedom is, despite what circumstances that we're in, what is our attitude and mindset?
Yeah. Love it. Well, I want to thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate you coming on, sharing your wisdom with our audience. And I've absolutely loved talking to you, Davin. Thank you very much.
It has been my pleasure. Thank you so much for this delightful conversation, for having me. I very much enjoyed our time together at Small Giants. I enjoyed our conversation here and look forward to more conversations in the future.
I do too. Thanks, Davin. All right. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Davin as much as I did. Purpose isn't some big idea out there. It's already in you. You don't need to go looking for it. But if you've lost your motivation, your clarity, and your sense of direction, then Davin's reminder is this: your purpose didn't disappear. It just got buried under all the noise. So big thanks to Davin for such a grounded and generous conversation. If you're feeling pulled in too many directions, go out and grab a copy of Thieves of Purpose. It's not just a book, it's really a wake-up call that exposes these 12 thieves that are holding you back from reaching your full potential. And of course, if you're enjoying these conversations, please hit the subscribe button wherever you watch or listen. It helps so many more business owners like you to find their way to us, to build better businesses and to find freedom that they were looking for when they set out. So catch you next time on the Freedom Experience. Have a great one.